Μην ανησυχείτε, ξεκινάει.
Не, моля, Грета, чуваш? Идеално си.
Μην ανησυχείτε, ξεκινάει.
Let's start.
Почнете да пише само това. Внимавайте да не се прехапате. Нищо, но това поводява. Аз на тебе няма да ходим. Ама не съм си ги слагала отдавна, защото на работа не искам да... Ако има възможност, само да кажа на Петрос.
Хвала, тук му се покаже да видиш.
Няма да показвам това.
Μπορούμε να ξεκινήσουμε.
Okay. Αρχίζω. Hello, Greta.
Καλημέρα.
Καλησπέρα.
Καλησπέρα.
Okay. Shall I start?
Yes.
Your Eminences, Reverend Fathers, dear sisters from all over the world, beloved students of our postgraduate inter-Orthodox and inter-jurisdictional master program in Orthodox Ecumenical Theology, we start today a new series of open public lectures, this time always on Fridays, this time by the teaching staff of this program. I am quite privileged and pleased to introduce to you our first speaker, Emeritus Professor Ivan Zelif Dimitrov, with whom I had the last, let's say, 40 or nearly 50 years, a similar or parallel or common ecumenical journey. I will start introducing him by my personal experience. We started our postgraduate studies in the University of Athens, having both of us, the late Professor Agouridis, an eminent New Testament Orthodox scholar, in the 70s, when Ivan was finishing his postgraduate and also studies in Greek, in Greece and in Greek language. I was entering my career first as a lecturer or as an assistant to Professor Agouridis, and then as a lecturer before I moved to the University of Thessaloniki. The journey with the ecumenical journey with Professor Dimitrov continued in what I remember. There are many other possibilities, but they come to my mind. Our common presence in 2 or 3 important ecumenical activities. We were both at the Executive Committee of the World Conference of Association of Theological Institutions, WOCATI. Now we have resigned, and our colleague, Professor Nikolaos Dimitriadis, is the only Orthodox representing actually the Orthodox academic theology in the Executive Committee of WOCATI. Now, my second experience with Ivan was when the Societas Novi Testament, the Studiorum Novi Testamenti Societas, decided to start an encounter between the Eastern European, immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Eastern European, mostly Orthodox biblical scholars, and the normal members of the Western Europe, or of the West in general, which resulted in at least creating the so-called biblical library in Sofia, directed by Professor Dimitrov. There was also another library in St. Petersburg, but we are now talking about Professor Dimitrov. Very briefly, his academic career as a professor of New Testament at the Theological Academy, later becoming Faculty of Theology in the University of Sofia, visiting professor in other universities, Munich, Germany, Veliko Trnovo, and other places, other universities, and also for 4 years, vice rector of the Sofia University. Then he was, from the beginning of the third millennium, dean of the theological faculty. And in addition to this, he helped his church, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, as an official translator for the Bulgarian-Greek church relations. And also he was the representative of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church in the dialogue with the Oriental Orthodox churches, representative of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church in the preparatory commissions of the Pan-Orthodox Holy and Great Council in the preparatory stages from the 1976, and most importantly, member of the Commission of Unit 2 of the World Council of Churches in the mid-90s. Nearly at the time I was serving as an Orthodox commissioner of the World Mission and Evangelism of the same organization of the World Council of Churches. I said that he studied also in the University of Athens, and his doctoral dissertation was on the Archpriestly Prayer of Jesus Christ, an exegetical commentary and analysis of John 17. And of course, he learned a lot by the professional in Johannine studies, the late Professor Agouridis. So today's presentation will come out of this experience, of his experience as a member of the Ecumenical Movement within the World Council of Churches and elsewhere, representing his church, but not only historically what happened in the past, but he will refer also to the future. The telling subtitle of his presentation, A Past Without Future. I am very anxious to hear his assessment and his church's perspectives. Professor Ivan, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Petro. So, it's my pleasure to speak this afternoon to all of you. As you mentioned, my presentation has the title, The Orthodox Church of Bulgaria in the Ecumenical Movement, a Past Without Future. That was the first version, and later I put it at the end, a question mark, because saying that it is a past without future, actually, that means that I exhausted the subject of my speech with the title itself. So, since the 1997, the Orthodox Church of Bulgaria withdrew from the World Council of Churches and has not participated further in it. Formally, since the following year, 98, the Church of Bulgaria withdrew from the Conference of European Churches. But this withdrawal from the ecumenical movement is only a formalization of a state that has long been observed. For several decades, our church was inactively involved in the ecumenical fora and events, very often only after insistence from other influential local churches in order to defend certain positions or to protect some quotas in the governing ecumenical bodies of the World Council. I want to say that the Church of Bulgaria did not have its own program for participation in the ecumenical movement. The individuals, bishops, and theologians who usually raised concrete issues during these meetings, ecumenical meetings, were in cooperation with forces foreign to the Church of Bulgaria, inside or outside of the country forces, and the tasks were dropped for implementation by other ecumenically engaged persons in our church. The Theological Academy, which actually was the form of existing of the Theological Faculty of Sofia University, established in 1923, and later in the time of the communist regime in the country, from 51 till 91, for 40 years, it was under the Holy Synod of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church as a theological academy, but in 91, again, we became a faculty of the Sofia University Faculty of Theology, as it is now. So the academy, or the Faculty of Theology, did not have ecumenical topics in its program. The same is the situation also in the other 3 universities in Bulgaria, where the theology is taught in the last 30 years. So the representatives of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church in the ecumenical movement were educated through their own participation in various events without special education in the subject. Unfortunately, the situation remains the same. The fashionable, so to say, now and too conservative notion of storage of orthodoxy, as some people in our environment say, led consequently to total rejection of contacts with non-Orthodox. In this sense, the main line of modern Bulgarian theology is anti-ecumenical. have been expressed opinions as, I quote, there should be no dialogue, of a young lecturer of the Faculty of Theology of Sofia University, or, I quote again, students should not be present at activities of other denominations in order to not convert to other faiths. That said, former dean of our faculty about maybe 15 or 20 years ago. It's evident that these positions are in line with the extreme positions of some bishops of our church. Whether the positions of these people are coordinated or simply influenced, mutually influenced, the fact is there. Under such circumstances, it is impossible to think about teaching of ecumenism at the faculties of theology in Bulgaria. Any ecumenical contact on local level of some of the Orthodox theologians is a private matter, and such a contact is seen as non-popular, if not discrediting, even discrediting for the person practicing it. In other words, there was not theoretical preparation for ecumenical work of or any discussions of the value of this work. In the society of Orthodox believers, and we, the Orthodox, are the vast majority in Bulgaria, ecumenical activity was seen as an opportunity for certain people to go on business trips to Western countries where it was not easy to go at that time. So a sort of a kind of ecumenical tourism. In this situation, one would say that then why should financial or human resources be spent to participate in the ecumenical movement? Reasonable question, but still this was not the reason for leaving the WCC in late 90s. The withdrawal of our church from the WCC was the result of some processes in our church which took place in parallel also in other local churches of the former communist countries. After the political changes in our countries, there was a lot of talk about the cooperation of the church leadership with the communist government in the past decades. And participation in the ecumenical movement was basically seen as the fulfillment of certain tasks set by the state authorities. As naive as this may seem now, it was also a question of presenting the situation in our countries as normal, even very good, and in any cases better than in the Western countries. It was a kind of propaganda of the communist regime in our country. And something from my personal experience, at an ecumenical conference, the head of our church's delegation, the late Metropolitan of Stara Zagora Pancratius, talked about how flourishing the situation in his diocese was, but then some of the listeners who knew me and in person and trusted me, they asked me whether all this is true. I naturally answered that it was not true and gave examples of the deplorable state of church life in our country. But formally, the Metropolitan had fulfilled his task. Nevertheless, this was not the only reason for the negative attitude towards the ecumenical movement. In the spirit of the accusations against the church was included the reproach that the church leadership betrayed our Orthodox faith not only politically, but also doctrinally. Brochures and books was translated and published in Bulgaria. Some of the translations and editions were even made abroad and were imported into our country in order to point out the threats for the Orthodox faith by various ideological currents and by certain actions of the bishops. Among these actions, participation in the ecumenical movement was mentioned in the first place. In this situation, the church leadership considered that the easiest compromise they could make was to leave the WCC. Unfortunately, in this way, they tacitly accepted the accusations against the ecumenical movement as correct. No one dared to point out positive reasons for participating in this movement. Criticism of the Orthodox Church's involvement in the ecumenical movement was not new. The Orthodox churches participate in the work of the World Council of Churches for many decades, some of the churches from the very beginning. Also the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, being in schisma till 1945, participated in some way in the first ecumenical events in the first half of last century. So some people assess this as evidence of their positive attitude towards ecumenism, while others note that such ecumenism is nothing more than a kind of formal membership in any organization. It is often added that ecumenical meetings and the documents adopted there ignore the most difficult and acute problems that still divide Christians, and that ecumenical activities are carried out mainly in line with modern pluralistic culture. The latter is able, I quote, is able to develop the ability to tolerate restrained mutual understanding and the ability to carefully and flexibly conduct a not quite sincere dialogue with a respect to the distance between the participants when their interests are not infringed and pain points are not affected. In other words, you have to be at least a little humanly cultured. Do not demand too much from others, and then you will become quite ecumenical. As the critics say, pluralistic culture, however, does not know how to turn divisions into differences within the whole. The pluralistic culture does not have in itself the so-called all unity, panenotita in Greece. Actually, the term comes maybe from Father Justin Popovic, the Serbian theologian and saint of the Orthodox Church, who speaks about vsejedinstvo or logosno vsejedinstvo, the panenotita and to logo to theu, this all unity, the holistic unity that also Vladimir Solovyov in the 19th century sought to reconcile Christians. Moreover, there can't be true unity without true sincerity and purity of intention. Many Orthodox are dissatisfied with the current state of ecumenism and therefore are skeptical of its prospects. To say it shortly, it is always easier to criticize something than to do it yourself. The main problem is, in my view, that the majority of Orthodox hierarchs do not take seriously ecumenism in which the task of reconciling Christians is considered without connection with the fullness and purity of truth, without genuine responsibility for the truth, namely responsibility in the face of our modern divided world, led by different forces to another unity, unity on anti-Christian basis, non-Christian and even anti-Christian basis. We are not against ecumenism, but we should not lower the level of ecumenism. I quote a refrain, a phrase which was for many decades the refrain of our Orthodox arch pastors. In the Ecumenical Movement, they reproach the dogmatic side of the faith is left unattended. The apostolic tradition, as well as the tradition from the Holy Fathers of the ancient undivided Church, has been ignored. Priority is given to good relations, practical mutual assistance, and cooperation in cultural exchange and religious education. All this is good in its own way, but a reconciliation achieved with a minimum of faith, on love with distance, on good deeds, not seasoned with the salt of truth, does not cost much. Orthodox hierarchs expressed the position that the ecumenical movement, in a number of its directions, went to a decrease in the level of persuasiveness, and serious opponents find it inconsistent with the gospel ideal. They insist that orthodoxy carries the fullness of truth. It is universal, that means ecumenical, ecumeniki, in spirit, universal in spirit. And if there is anything good in ecumenism, then this is also in orthodoxy. There is no other way, they add, to reconcile and achieve Christian unity except on the basis of orthodoxy, that true Christianity to which ecumenically minded people must aspire. And if an Orthodox Christian really finds the grace of God in the Holy Spirit, that means the grace of inner peace, purity of heart, through faith, love in the service of God and neighbor, then he will be a source of reconciliation in various situations, including in relations with non-Orthodox Christians. In fact, he will do what ecumenists call him to do. We will find ways to the hearts of Catholics and Protestants and other non-Orthodox Christians and build relationship with them in a spirit of true love. These true allegations are usually associated with the statement that we Orthodox do not need to change anything in response to the challenge of the other Christians in the ecumenical movement. Like that, let others take care to return to the true orthodoxy that we have never left. But won't we be like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son, saying that? Or maybe we are not suitable for him in one company. The patriarch of a local Orthodox church, under very difficult situations, many decades ago, wrote with a sense of self-criticism. I quote, "Every non-Orthodox representative of Christianity, no matter how far he is from the Orthodox Church, will always remain for the Orthodox Christian the object of spiritual care. It is natural for a Christian to become all things to all men. That means to recognize the very little, the last particle of truth, if a person has it, in order to be clear to the people in front of him through this particle of truth, and to save at least some, in the sense of what St. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. But such a sublime mood is only an ideal, seldom feasible in practice. The inner sense of truth is therefore not audible to them with such immediate clarity. Usually faith is something external to them, and therefore their relations to their faith and to church will not be so alive, but at the same time their attitude to the non-Orthodox Christians will no longer be the same." End of quotation. It happens very often that instead of testifying to Catholics and Protestants the purity, the beauty, the truth of the evangelical in the original sense, I mean the New Testamental orthodoxy, many of our partial, or so to say, semi-orthodox, semi-church Orthodox brothers demonstrate to the world their passions, conflicts, commitment to spiritually unenlightened leaders and ideologies, slipping into nationalist passions, political ambitions, and pure obscurantism. At the same time, fidelity to the truth of orthodoxy turns into ugly confessionalism without the inner experience of the highest truth and its implementation in actions in our own life, without the ability to convincingly convey it to other Christians, without strong inner confidence in the truth of orthodoxy in meetings with non-Orthodox Christians. In this case, unfortunately, the spirit of alienation and separation operates effectively. The semi-church Orthodox, that means, that's not my term, expression, semi-church, that they are in the church, but actually they act not as people of the church, of the Orthodox Church. These semi-church Orthodox Christians, in their spiritual condition, are not in a better position in relations to the true Orthodoxy, the evangelical, the New Testamental Orthodoxy, than Christians from non-Orthodox churches. It's very important to us as a Christian tradition to have dogmatic purity and an unbroken continuity with the tradition of the ancient church, but it is a severe spiritual failure for us as a community of Orthodox to not be able to carry out what faith and tradition demand from us. And maybe the ecumenists, with their poorer spiritual baggage, but with a more responsible attitude to the commandment, "May all be one," will be more righteous before the God than the position of those who declare that we do not need any ecumenism because the Orthodox Church has everything necessary for salvation, is of little value. It's clear that the Christ's commandment of unity and love remains unfulfilled. This not fulfilled actually means rejected. The existence and development of ecumenism is therefore justified by the extinction of the spirit, as again St. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. Extinction of the spirit among Orthodox and among Christians of other traditions. Before we become able to testify to the other Christians, to the non-Orthodox, about the truth of Orthodoxy, we need to gain the strength and the persuasion to do so, but this will not be given to those who gloomily and stubbornly condemned all non-Orthodoxy. We must begin with the honest acknowledgement of the extinction of the spirit in our own environment and the weak involvement in our church life of the early Christian tradition, which we are usually proud of. And before showing the firmness of the will to unity, one must take up the cross of living pain from the wound of the church rupture, from the fact that the command, may all be one, has not been fulfilled, and must sincerely pray for the union of all. Only then the Orthodox Church will regain their universal breadth, will revive the spirit of Christian universalism of the times of the first generations of Christians, so necessary for true ecumenism. The creative revival of the Orthodox world is a necessary condition for solving the ecumenical question, wrote a long time ago Father George Florovsky. But it should be preceded by a positive attitude of the Orthodox people towards the Christian world beyond the visible boundaries of the Orthodox churches. An open-minded Russian Orthodox bishop of the last century urged, I quote, to recognize for other Christian associations their belonging to the true Church of Christ, and for every baptized person the right to consider and to call himself a Christian who has the possibility of salvation in the church to which he belongs. In other words, a Christian, a Baptist, or a Lutheran, he mentions Baptists and Lutherans because that these are the biggest Protestant denominations in Russia. In other words, a Christian should recognize that both Orthodox and Catholics have the same possibilities of eternal salvation as his fellows in the church they belong. If this joy of the possibility of salvation of every Christian becomes a common Christian feeling, then no one baptized person will condemn other baptized people to eternal destruction just because they belong to another church organization. What memorable words indeed. We Orthodox Christians received from the ancient undivided church great spiritual wealth, which we should gladly offer to accept all non-Orthodox Christians. This includes the apostolic and patristic tradition, the succession and the grace of the hierarchy. The conciliarity of the church life, the sacraments and purity of faith, the beauty and depth of worship, the spiritual experience and wisdom of ascetics and saints, the unity with all martyrs and saints in different times and various peoples. All this should be revealed to everybody who seek the highest truth. But instead of offering openness, generosity, joy, and love, we too often lock in ourselves and gloomily grumble from the kennel of our own ego. The Orthodox theologian Olivier Clement wrote about, I quote, confusion and fear caused by the collision with modernity, and which exacerbated the feeling of weakness in the face of urgent needs, like catechesis, renewal, dialogue with the intelligentsia, with scientists and representatives of other religions. End of quote. Father Clement saw this widespread throughout the Orthodox world, having access to a great spiritual heritage and actually being outside of it without the opportunity to use it for the Christian witness today is our cross from the past historical sins and their consequences. A huge number of today's Orthodox Christians actually do not know the tradition and fall into dependence on various ideologues and mentors who are far from the true piety and love of Christ. As a result, in the eyes of many convicted but poorly educated in the essence of the Orthodox faith, the ideas of ecumenism have been simply compromised in recent years. And it must be honestly admitted that not at the top, I mean the bishops, but at the bottom of the church, there was bitter disappointment in the words which we repeatedly say about brotherly love, which works miracles. The church pastors, ecumenists, were called enemies of orthodoxy, and the word ecumenism began to be perceived as abusive. In fact, having put the label of heresy on ecumenism, the true Orthodox people are already registering its supporters as anti-Christians, as servants of the Antichrist, with whom they must fight only to the victorious end. And at the end, what is the future of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church and the Ecumenical Movement? This is an issue of increasing difficulty. Several years ago, were often expressed opinion that with the election of a new patriarch in the place of the century-old Patriarch Maxim, who died 2012, with the election of a new patriarch will occur a chance and Bulgaria will become more open to non-Orthodox world. But people who had such hopes just forget that the policy of the Orthodox Church is made by the bishops, the members of the Holy Synod, not only by the Patriarch. And still the bishops remain the same, with the same lack of capacity to meet the challenges not only of tomorrow, but even of the present day. This is not a good conclusion for such a survey, but at least it's honest. Nevertheless, for a happy end, I would like to add that there is still a hope which never died. The hope does not disappoint, according to St. Paul. Our hope lies firstly in Christ, and secondly in the young generation. And I hope that the majority of the people who hear me now are young. The problem with the young generation of the Orthodox Church in Bulgaria is, however, that they almost do not have they don't have any positive examples to follow, because the old is gone and a new should be created. We, all of us, ought to help creating new examples. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dimitrov. In my view, my first reaction is that it is a very honest, though regrettable situation, that it is not only in the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, but nearly in almost all, to different degrees, of course, Orthodox churches. You mentioned the assessment of my friend in the Ecumenical Movement, Todor Sabev, who was the deputy director or deputy secretary, I can't remember exactly, representing the Orthodox Church in the World Council of Churches. Before we collect the questions from those attending, and first of all from our students, for those attending your lecture, and it is quite thoughtful in my view, and extremely honest, without hiding the deficits of our church behavior, church relations with the others, with the non-Orthodox. Let me ask a question, because we were together preparing some proposals to the forthcoming then, just 4 years or 5 years ago, forthcoming Holy and Great Council, commenting on the mission document, the mission of the Orthodox Church in today's world. Having this experience, what may be the reasons? You explain well the reasons why the Bulgarian Orthodox Church withdrew, first from the World Council of Churches, later from the KEC, from the Council of European Churches, and sometimes they also questioned the bilateral dialogues at some stages. What was the reason of your church not participating in the great event of the Pan-Orthodox Synod, the Holy and Great Council? This is my first, just to initiate the discussion. In the meantime, myself and Professor Dimitrov will collect the questions from the audience. Now, the floor is yours again, Professor Dimitrov.
Yeah. Officially, actually, the officially position,
we cannot
the official
see
position of our church for not participating in the Holy and Great Council was published, and that was that the documents of the prepared documents for the Holy Council were not well prepared, so they needed more work. But that was, in my view, not the sincere answer. It was said, it was written also by many authors, but not officially, of course, that our church leadership was under pressure by other big church which wanted to have a church like Bulgarian or Georgian church as an example for not going to the council, and to, if possible, to postpone the convocation of the Holy Council. Of course, the church is a society of people, has its own politics, but
Ivan, may you increase the light because it is too dark.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why, but
yeah. Okay, you are right.
Okay. Continue.
Moment.
Just a reminder. Now it's okay.
Yeah. So, I mean that political reasons, political or church political, the same reasons were behind this decision of our church to don't go to Crete. I'm very sorry that it happened, because I was from the 76, from the very first proconciliar meeting in Geneva and Chambézy, was in the preparation of the Holy Synod, and I was able to follow also all the what happens in the behind the, how we say in English, behind the scene, the paraskinia, unofficially what happened, and how certain churches try to influence different decisions. Unfortunately, all these things are far from the faith issues, far from what we are called to preach and to follow the teaching of Jesus Christ.
Now, thank you very much. Now you have answered my first question. A similar one is being placed by our students, Jeffrey Mugadisi, asking, is it possible that we try to introduce short courses in university or seminaries or high school even, that can stimulate back the need of ecumenism in the conscience of the Orthodox, of the young generations, and thus avoid the fear of Orthodox being converted to other denominations? What is your response to this? I would say it's not a question only, but it's a hope, if I may understood it well. Ivan.
I'm I'm not sure that such an idea could be realized in our country, in our environment, the Orthodox Church in Bulgaria, for the time being. Maybe in a later stage, but not now. Not now. We have to live some years, maybe the 40 years in the desert of the Israeli people, and after that to realize again the need of Christian unity, because we should not be selfish. We cannot reach too much as only one church, one local church. And if in the last 1 or 2 years we see that the family of the Orthodox churches also is more or less in passions of some divisions. What to say about the whole Christianity? We need each other. I remember many years ago a German bishop, evangelical bishop, who was the head of the office of the Roman Catholic bishop from Germany. Unfortunately, cannot remember the name. Who was the head of the office of the Roman Catholic Church in Brussels, came to Bulgaria. I was dean in that time, and visited our faculty, and we spoke about the need of unity of all Christian churches in Brussels in order to influence the politics of the European Union. I asked this bishop, but your church is so influenced, such possibilities of influence has your Catholic Church. Why you need our small Bulgarian church? And the answer was that actually all churches need to be united because the politicians do not recognize Catholicism or Protestantism or Orthodoxy. So also for these political decisions, which affect, of course, the life of the believers in Europe, we need this unity. So the unity is needed in every place of our life, of course, not only in politics or not only in education, which is also a reality. And if you mentioned presenting my humble person in the beginning, that as a member of the Society of New Testament Studies, SNTS, I achieved to establish a Biblioteca Biblica in Sofia for all our region, and we help really our friends from the neighboring countries and colleagues in the New Testament studies with these books. We have now about 12,000 new published in the last decades theological books in Old Testament and New Testament, also in Hebraica, which was not possible to use such
Previously.
books before. And all this happened with help from the majority non-Orthodox scholars from Europe, from USA, from Canada, America, Australia, etc. Because in the years before go to Greece, actually as a student and doctoral student, the only foreign so to say literature I could use in that time was
Greek.
published before the Second World War. So 30 years later, we still was far away from the possibility to use recently published literature. So a lot of advantages could have such a cooperation, and the accusations of the real Orthodox, so to say, people in our country, in your country also, in other Orthodox countries, they never stop to accuse the other people, if not for ecumenical contacts. They will find something else, just because they attacked the Church of Christ, not us, not me, not you, Professor Vassiliadis. They want to attack the Church of Christ, believing that is the awful, believing that they are defending the real, the true, the Orthodox truth.
Yeah, let's go back to the question about the possibility of teaching ecumenism. I know from my student in the Ecumenical Institute in Bosé, who is now dean or whatever it is, he's Dimitar Panomariov. I know many other academics who are open-minded. Are they allowed to introduce courses in ecumenical movement or in ecumenical dialogue, in Christian reconciliation, not to say interfaith dialogue? And since I have another question, allow me to place this to you. And it is from the message of the Holy and Great Council. And I wonder now whether this may be one of the reasons of some conservative, as you indicated, churches like the church in Bulgaria did not want to participate and give essence to the expected for 100 years Pan-Orthodox Church. In response to her obligation is the third paragraph of the message to the people, to witness to the truth and her apostolic faith. Our church, our Orthodox Church, attaches great importance to dialogue, primarily with non-Orthodox Christians. This is an affirmation of the Holy and Great Council, explained in more details in the special document on relations with Christians, with other Christians. In this way, the remainder of the Christian world comes to know more precisely the authenticity of the Orthodox tradition, the value of patristic teaching, and the liturgical life and faith of the Orthodox. So even in this very mild expression that with dialogue, perhaps other peoples can be attracted to Orthodoxy, there is also an affirmation of the necessity of the dialogue, of the sincere dialogue, the way you present it in your paper. And the dialogues conducted by the Orthodox Church never imply, just to remove any fear, never imply a compromise in matters of faith. So the floor is again yours till we have other questions by the audience or by our students.
Yeah, thank you. The text of the Holy Pan-Orthodox Synod is clear, of course, and nobody participating in that's my experience actually from the mid-70s, never try or will to betray, so to say, the Orthodox faith. The accusations actually are just because they sound so interesting in the ears of the believers. But what you asked me about the possibility to teach ecumenism at the theological faculties in Bulgaria, and you mentioned my colleague Professor Dimitrov in Veliko Tarnovo University. It is actually a matter of autonomy, academic autonomy of the university or the faculty. Of course, they could do that, but every professor or every academic teacher starting a course for sure is under the pressure of what the bishops of the church would say about this or other subject. So it is true that for several years I heard that a bishop suggested to his people to go to Veliko Tarnovo University and not to Sofia University, because in the Sofia University the teaching staff is ecumenical, which is not the reality, of course. But nevertheless, this bishop had this impression for us to be ecumenists, and so he suggested to go to another university. So if one bishop is thinking in this way and proceeding in this way, you see that there are not many possibilities. The university or the theology in at the universities is not under the control of the church. Of course, the only control is our conscience as Orthodox scholars, of course, but nevertheless, I don't see any possibility for the next years, at least, to have a positive change. So maybe later on, and maybe having a really united Orthodoxy, really united and working as united Orthodox Church, then we could see positive changes also in the local churches.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dimitrov. May I tell our students that Professor Dimitrov's lecture will be sent to you by email, and it will be a kind of your studium. I don't know whether Professor Dimitriadis has anything else.
We have a couple of questions.
Okay.
From the students again.
Okay.
So one comes from Eleni Vafia that says, do you believe in a dialogue with non-Christians and which will lead to knowledge of Christianity, and interfaith dialogue between the different parts of Christians will lead us to ecumenism?
Okay, this is the last question to Professor.
And then another one, I guess.
Another one. Place all questions now.
Okay. The other will be, Jeffrey says that WCC is trying to see Bulgaria rejoin them. Why don't they recommend youth to go to Bosei? I'm sure after studies they may bring change in different parishes, and slowly things might change.
So, the final say from you, Professor Dimitrov.
And before that, I have also a very short comment, dear Professor. So, Professor Dimitrov, we had a couple of days ago another another lecture by Reverend Professor Hyacinth Destivel about the challenges and perspective of Orthodox Catholic theological dialogue. And you both, let's say, ended your lecture, you with a hope that, you know, this things will change, I mean, for the good. And Professor Reverend Destivel also talked about, okay, hope is good, but it must be also a desire. So I would like also a comment on that. So those three things. Thank you very much.
First to your question, the desire is of course very important, but we could also cultivate this desire. We should not stay inactive for the desire to come from somewhere, but we should cultivate it. The first is to say the truth to the people, to explain that all these accusations against ecumenism actually is a real sin of some people in the churches, and of course the people should be educated in finding new ways of contacts, of new ways of living with other people. You know, I want to. I'm sorry that old or aged people usually say stories, but a story almost 40 years ago in Germany, I explained to a Roman Catholic priest how the situation in our church in Bulgaria is, how difficult it is under communism, and he answered me, which was not, which sounds strange to me in that time. He told me, oh, okay, Mr. Dimitrov, I understand you, but nevertheless, I believe that Coca-Colismus is more dangerous than communismus, than communism. So these consumative way of thinking and doing is more dangerous than ideological suppression. Let me now to see the written questions. Do you believe that a dialogue with not only, of course, I believe that such a dialogue is needed. It is needed. The dialogue is not necessary to be on a scholarly level, not very interesting, not understandable enough for the people, but to have a dialogue, to share values, to share feelings, if you want, not only sources, because the sources are not only material, they could be also emotional, etc. So such a dialogue between the different parts of Christians will lead, of course, to this situation, which could be called ecumenism, could be called maybe Christian globalism. Why not? But globalism in this good sense. The other question, about the possibility for sending people to Bosse, to the Ecumenical Institute of Bosse. Of course, I know the work and the tradition of this institute. Several of my colleagues and friends studied there, I mean from Bulgaria, and have very good impressions, and were also find a big benefit from these studies there. So that is also a good possibility. Nevertheless, to send students there should be done by the church leadership, by the bishops, not on because someone wants to go to Bosse to be accepted there, because for the ecumenical context is important. The people who will learn ecumenical relations to be representative for the church, for the country, and not only for his own person.
Now, I think we have completed today's public lecture. I have to remind you all and our those who attended this first open public lecture by the staff, the teaching staff of Moet, that next Tuesday we have another eminent, that time a member of the academic committee, Metropolitan Ilarion of Volokolamsk, Ilarion Alfeyev, a professor or rector or director of St. Cyril and Methodius postgraduate school. Again, at the same time, again, with an open YouTube dissemination of his lecture. So good night, everybody, because from afternoon we move to the night or the evening, and see you next Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you.